I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He's a Canadian expert, for us to take a building wealth through real estate, no other than Mr. Michael Matthew. Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Michael, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Sure, Daniel. Thanks for having me. I've been a professional accountant for more than 30 years now, and I'm based in the Toronto area. The last decade plus, I focused on real estate investors and real estate investment, and so that's really my specialty. I also work for a home builder as a CFO and have a couple of CFO uh, part-time contracts as well. So I see real estate from all different angles.
What motivated you to start investing in real estate?
I looked at where most of the people who became wealthy had their wealth coming from. And for the vast majority, at least some of that wealth was through real estate. And as they say, they're not making any more land. So it's a somewhat scarce commodity and it's something that people will need for their entire life. They'll need a place to stay. So seemed like a very good asset class to dig into and invest in.
Certainly. So, what are the key traits of a successful real estate investor?
There's a number of things that make for a successful real estate investor. Number one, I would say, is you have to look at it as truly a business and not get emotional about a particular property or properties. It's important to remember that for the most part, you're not going to be living in these places. Your tenants will be. And you need to just look at the numbers. Is this an investment that is likely to generate income or is it not? And you just go through the expected revenue, the expected expenses, and obviously you need to have a bit of a cushion for the unexpected and make sure that you have the ability to generate a profit. You also need a certain amount of patience,
Lots of patience.
lots of patience, and understand that you're going to look at more deals than you're going to want to invest in. In other words, you'll be rejecting quite a few. And that's just part of the numbers game that real estate investment is. You need to find a property that is suitable for whatever your investment model is and can be acquired at a suitable price. And where people get into trouble is they get into a situation where they fall in love with a property and they just have to have it and they end up overpaying for it. Or in the case of one of my clients, she put in an offer on a property and waived the property inspection, which is fairly standard, only to find out some $30,000 later that the house was full of mold and that had to be dealt with before she could even begin to rent it out. So there's a situation where emotion got in the way. And you also need some education. You need to find out what real estate model works for you, and you need to find out where that model will work for you. Not all models will work equally in all locations. So I have a number of clients that like to invest in the US, and it's important when you're investing anywhere, but particularly in the US, to make sure that you're investing in a landlord friendly jurisdiction. Where I live in Ontario, it can take 6 to 12 months just to get a hearing before the landlord tenant board to kick out a tenant who's not paying. And I was on a call with someone in Texas who apologized because it took 3 weeks to get a hearing to kick someone out if they weren't paying your rent. It's a
So,
dramatic difference, obviously.
so Mr. Michael, how do you analyze the potential profitability of a property?
You start off with a spreadsheet model that is available from investor groups, or if you have a real estate coach, they often have one available. And then you need to gather the information to plug into that. So when you're looking at a property, you'll get the latest rental information. Usually you go back a year and find out what the actual rent is, not the expected rent, because there's often a tenant or two that's not paying when you're talking on a larger unit property. And then you get the actual utility bills, you get the actual property tax bills, you get the property management bills that the current owner is paying. And so you build not just a theoretical model, but you build an actual model based on the facts on the ground that'll give you a true picture of whether something's profitable or not. And then, of course, you have to factor in how you're going to finance the property, whether you have private investors or you're getting a loan from a financial institution. And you obviously need to factor in the interest you're paying those investors or institutions to make sure that you're covering all the costs that will come into play.
What role does networking play in your success for a real estate investor?
Networking can save you a lot of trouble if you do it correctly. So there are many Facebook and meetup groups that are specific to one particular geographic area, and you should join the groups that are appropriate to where you're looking to invest and just ask people, you know, who's a investor friendly realtor in this area? Are there any local banks that cater to working with investors? uh, who's a good property manager? And if you start getting the same name coming up 2 or 3 times, probably a good indication that's someone you should get in touch with. And that saves you a whole lot of legwork. And what you'll find is once you contact, say, a good property manager, they will often know allied professionals, such as they'll know an electrician, a plumber, an HVAC technician that they've worked with in the past and have confidence in their abilities. So by getting that one key referral, you can often sort of daisy chain into their network and save yourself a lot of time. At the same token, get yourself someone who's coming recommended that the people you're working with know and trust.
Oh, very well said, Mr. Michael. And can you give me a minute? Just give me a minute. Just 1 minute for this. The recording is still on. Sorry for that. Sorry for that. And my next question is, how do you stay informed about the market trends and property values?
I stay on top of the market trends simply by participating in networking groups myself. I have a very strong networking group that I belong to locally that works actually internationally. And I also have real estate coaches that I'm in constant contact with. So I get their feedback on particular markets and they're always available to answer questions. So it's just basically staying immersed in it myself is the way that I can not only help myself make these decisions, but also help my clients do the same.
Very well said. So, what challenges have you faced in real estate investing and how did you overcome them?
One of the big challenges I've found personally is the quality of tenants. And when I first got into the rental business, I had a couple of dream tenants, no trouble at all. And I thought, boy, this landlord stuff is easy. It turns out, though, that wasn't the case with my next tenant, as they ended up having a cockroach problem. And it took months of basically being in touch with them on a regular basis, having cockroaches sprayed throughout the unit at my own personal cost, trying to get control of the problem, and eventually negotiating the tenant just leaving the lease and walking out the door. And at that point, I had to seriously consider if I wanted to continue renting the unit or just sell it outright because it's so discouraging. So, screening your tenants professionally is something that you don't want to skip over because I was fortunate in that I had all these extra expenses, but I was paid my rent for the full term. And that's not always the case when someone is such a problem. They often decide to stop paying rent at the same time. So you either need to develop a screening process or hire someone. Often property managers will have that built into their process is tenant screening, or you may be able to work with a real estate agent, which is what I did, to do the screening for you. It's not foolproof, of course, but it makes it more objective and more likely you're not going to have problems if you have a formal process. Renting out units, it's not a time to be charitable. It's a time to make money. And then if you want to be charitable, then take the money you've made and you can donate to whatever cause you support. You shouldn't put someone into one of your buildings just because you want to help them out. That's a recipe for disaster, which I've heard some horror stories from fellow landlords.
So, Mr. Michael, how important is a property's location when making investment decisions?
Well, as they say, the three most important things in real estate are location, location, location. And I find that to be absolutely true, especially if you're not familiar with the city that you're investing in. What could be a great area for investment on one street, literally the next street over, could be very problematic. And so that's where you need to rely on local experts, your local real estate agent who knows down to the street level where you should invest and where you shouldn't. And you also need to factor in the type of investing you're doing. So for instance, if you've decided to cater to student rentals, then obviously proximity to a university or college is exactly what you want. If you're, on the other hand, catering more towards families who have young kids, they're probably not going to want to be in an area that is subject to late night partying and similar noises. So you would not want to be near that university. So factoring in the type of investing, overlaying the location, I think is going to get you a good place for you to put your money.
Definitely. So, how do you handle property management for your investments?
Personally, I'm fortunate in that I'm owning a condo apartment, and the vast majority of the large expenses is all covered by the condo. And there's very little maintenance internally to the units. Uh, Basically, you're replacing a faucet, every 3 to 5 years, and there's major appliances maybe every 10. Beyond that, as long as the tenant is taking good care of your unit, the expenses are minimal. If, on the other hand, it's a single family home, then even if you are local and you can do the repairs and maintenance yourself, I recommend that you price out what having a professional property manager would cost and make sure that factoring that in, it's still a good investment for you because that gets you in the habit of making that calculation, given that eventually you'll want to invest in properties that are just not convenient for you to manage by yourself. And by being in a mode where you automatically factor in property management fees, then you'll be accustomed to doing that and you won't forget to account for that when you're looking at more efficient
Excuse me.
properties that you're looking to acquire.
So, what is your biggest mistake you have made in real estate?
The biggest mistake I made was investing in the US and not factoring in foreign exchange. So I loaned funds in US dollars, was paid interest
Sorry.
and principal in US dollars, literally every penny I was owed. But I didn't factor in the timing of those repayments because, believe it or not, at the time, the Canadian dollar was worth more than the US. So I actually lost money on the
Huge.
exchange. And that was a wake up call to me that, okay, investing across borders can certainly be very profitable, but you have to factor in the timing of those foreign exchange transactions because it can make or break your deal. On the conversely, if the dollars had moved in the opposite direction, I would have made money on the interest and made even more money on the exchange. Unfortunately, in this particular case, that didn't happen.
So, how do you determine whether to renovate or sell property as it is?
As it is. You need to get a realistic repair estimate done by a contractor that you trust if you're not capable of doing that yourself. And then you look at comps or comparable sales prices to your repaired value home. What would that look like in the market? And then determine if there's sufficient profit to justify it. Everyone has their own metrics, but most of my clients, they want to make at least a $30,000 return or more if they're going to be doing a fix and flip where they buy a property and need a repair it, and then look to sell it as quickly as possible, 3 to 6 months, let's say. And they may find that there's not sufficient cushion for that to happen, in which case, yeah, I've seen people that will buy a property and list it basically immediately and they'll make 10, 15, 20,000 just for doing some paperwork. So it really depends on your goals and your resources. Some people will buy properties that are local because they're contractors themselves and they supply the labor essentially at no cost. So they have, of course, a lot more room when it comes to the pricing because they're only paying for their materials.
So, what are the tax benefits of real estate investing and how do you maximize them?
Tax benefits are numerous. Certainly, depreciation is one large benefit because it's a non-cash expense that can often reduce or eliminate your taxes, such that even though you have a positive cash flow, you're not paying any income tax because of this additional expense. So that's one of them. Another advantage is that you do not have to put down the entire purchase price to acquire real estate. Typically, looking at a down payment of 20 to 30%, and that allows you to borrow the rest, which means rather than buying 100% of one property, you'd buy two or three properties by putting that money towards down payments and borrowing the rest. And of course, the interest you're paying on those loans would be a tax deductible expense.
So, Mr. Matthew, what will be your advice for those first timer entering a real estate investing?
Get some education, get some coaching or mentorship, and take action. If you have those three things, then you're certainly going to be able to enter into the real estate investment career and make a good return on your efforts. I've seen people that charge in with knowing almost nothing, and sometimes that works out. And sometimes, like in the case of my client who ended up with this huge mold problem, it doesn't work so well. Other people want to be trained on every possible eventuality, and they end up having years of trainings under their belt, and they have zero properties because they've never taken any action. So you need a balance of those things. But if you have that balance, you're going to have a successful investment career.
Definitely very well said. Mr. Michael, very well said. So, to sum up our discussion, what is your long term vision for a real estate portfolio?
You have to get a real estate portfolio that matches your goals. I have a client who invested in pre construction condos around the Toronto area, and he bought five of them. And
Wow.
so his over years, and his retirement plan is to sell a condo every 3 to 5 years and live off the income. That works out very well for him. Other clients have young children and they needed a way to fund their education. And so they acquired a home for each one of those kids, and it provides rental income in the meantime. And then when they go to university, the plan is to sell those homes, one for each child, and basically fund their university education through that. Other people want to retire and have additional income coming in beyond the basic government pensions. And so for those people, it could be a great solution is to have a rental property or two that pay them money every month and supplement their income that way. So basically, match your investment strategy to your financial goals, and you'll end up with a good solution.
Totally agree, Mr. Michael. And can you please invite our listeners to support your firms or project that you want to offer?
Sure. I recently released my book, which is what I think you can see now here.
Yes.
It's called A to Zen Real Estate Peace of Mind Strategies for the Canadian Investor. And that's available on Amazon. It just came out very recently.
Uh,
And
yes, people, let's support Mr. Michael Matthew. Because if you support him, more books to come, empowering books to come that guide you in the real estate. So, Mr. Michael, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
More to come, people. See you soon. I want to apologize for that. Our something in the middle of interview.